Hello, members. Tom Morrison here with the Metal Trading Institute. We're excited to be here today, coming out of Furnaces North America with so many people at Furnaces. I want to talk about that in just a little bit, but today we're going to talk about today's topic as being carbon neutral. So many people, it's not even on their radar screen. They don't know what it is, and we're hoping today that you get a lot more informed on it, because something that needs to be on your radar screen, because it's going to hit your bottom lines financially, as well as a couple other areas with equipment costs and stuff. So today I want to remind you, as me and our guest Brian chat about this stuff. You can see over here to the right. If you haven't, you can click chat at the bottom, and the chat box will pop up. You can see I've put in hello members, where are you listening from? It'd be great to have you pop in and put your city and state to see where we can see where you're listening from. And if you see anything, hear anything in the comments that you'd like either comment on and or ask a question, please do. I'll be monitoring that, and we'll ask the questions and get that discussion going. But a couple big things to talk about on our MTI happenings. We've got 2 or 3 things that really you want to be excited about. So Furnaces North America just happened in Indianapolis, Indiana. And Brian, you were there. 30 seconds on just what it was like being at Furnaces North America.
It's always a good experience at Furnaces, right? I mean, we get a lot of our main customers there to discuss new technologies, but really just the camaraderie, having a chance to finally get out and see everybody again, right? Really in person, and it was a great show. It's a great format because it helps us as vendors and exhibitors to have everybody. It's kind of concentrated, right? So we get a big bang for our buck there, but really just to see the customers touch base really face to face.
Yeah, it was great to see the social events packed, and then the trade show floor arena, and just exhibitors and customers just talking it out and talking business. It was great, and the technical sessions were really good as well. So, but it was a great thing to go to. And then 2 things you want to pay attention to coming up in November early is our next set of these live webcasts is on November 8th. We're having our next technical standards update that there's some big things going on at NADCAP and AMEC that you're going to be a part of if you're in the aerospace industry, and ASTM on hardness testing. So you want to be on that November 8th. And November 10th, we have our next sales forecasting webcast with ITR Economics. The economy is swinging. Are we in a recession? Are we not? And so many people are wondering where we headed. Well, on ITR Economics, you're going to figure that out on November 10th. So you want to make sure you sign in and be there for that. You can go to, if you're ever wondering what's going on with MTI as far as meetings and our webcast, you can go to heattreat.net. Our website, heattreat.net, and scroll down just a little bit, and you'll see our schedule of events and these big blocks, and it'll tell you what's happening. And click in there, it gives you the details of how to participate, whether it's an in-person meeting or one of these live webcasts. But really excited today to be here with Brian Kelly from Honeywell. Brian, Honeywell's been a great diamond sponsor of MTI, a great member for many years. And so share with the people listening in just a little bit about Brian Kelly, who you are, and then Honeywell.
Yes. So Brian Kelly, I'm the applications engineering manager for Honeywell Thermal Solutions, actually now SETS, which is Smart Energy and Thermal Solutions. We always like to keep it interesting, right? So what I do for the company is I kind of oversee and work with our engineer to order department, as well as look over special systems related to emissions, performance, things of that nature. I always tell the people, it's like my department keeps the company out of trouble, making sure the right combustion equipment, system controls, all that are in place for emissions, performance, things of that nature. I started my career at Houck Manufacturing, based in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, but Honeywell has acquired Calypso over the years and Maxon and things. So we've got a lot of those companies, those legacy brands under our umbrella. So this is a good opportunity to be a very much touch the worldwide community.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Well, we thank y'all for so much for being a part of F&A, MTI, and just being a big. I know Jim Roberts, who a lot of people that listen in know was a part of it for many years, and we're just glad that you and Kevin Graber and your team have stepped in and really pushed the envelope with Honeywell and been a big part of MTI. So appreciate that.
Yeah, no, we appreciate it as well.
So let's get into the topic of carbon neutrality, Brian. I went around this whole week and last week and was watching tons of 1 to 4 minute videos on just what is being sustainable. What is carbon neutrality? What does it mean to a manufacturing process like heat treating and everything? So let's jump into that. So what is carbon neutrality, the whole sustainability, carbon neutrality mean?
So when this is, it's really understanding the difference of some of the terms get tossed around these days, right? You hear the buzzwords, just not carbon neutrality, but net zero, zero emissions, climate positive, net positive, decarbonization, sustainability. So they all start to bleed together in that public consciousness a little bit. So while they generally cut from the same emissions related type cloth, the terms get used interchangeably and sometimes to an incorrect degree. So And whether that's intentionally or inadvertently, it's a form of what you can say greenwashing to watch
Right.
out for. So the main difference is you should be aware of is when you talk carbon neutrality, it's referring to carbon emissions generated, but then can be offset elsewhere to achieve a net neutral outcome. Net zero refers to the balance between all generated and removed emissions, just not carbon, but a more ambitious way to achieve net zero emissions is remove that net part altogether, right? I mean, you just
Right.
don't emit it. And
Right.
that's kind of the carbon zero type zero emissions. And that's beyond that, you start talking carbon negative or climate positive type terms where if you remove, that's removing more emissions from the atmosphere than you can actually emit. So in short, zero emissions means no greenhouse gases
So,
whatsoever were emitted. So yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I just gonna say, so I don't want to run down a political rabbit hole, but I mean,
Yep.
some people might be saying carbon neutrality, why do we even need it? So, I mean, it's an impact on what they call the climate change stuff.
Yep.
So, I mean, if you could just brief, what is that all about in terms of why this is even needed?
So, I mean, there's been a global, at least in my viewpoint, I mean, you can certainly say, hey, weather's a little different than it ever has. Hey, I live in Texas, so it's hotter than I've been here 4 years, and last summer was the hottest it's ever been.
Right.
And I think that's the way in a lot of country or a lot of states, but also all over the world. And it's getting more press, it's getting more attention because people are seeing those changes. And I'm not going to get into politics either, but some of what you'll hear is different pledges, all the corporations, and we'll talk about that a little bit, I'm sure, but it's going to the Paris Agreement in 2015 as a global frame network, at least a framework to start looking at these, is that like 1.5C pledge, which is, hey, beyond pre-industrial conditions, global temperature rise, we want to limit it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And from what all the scientists, or what, if you read about it, it says, hey, if we get to 2, it's going to be catastrophic. We got to try to limit it at 1.5 or at 1.1, do all the math and everything. It's taking measures to try to, and what they see as the largest contributor to global warming is CO2, just because it's well, when you look at fossil fuel burning, you maximize CO2 to get the most efficiency
Right.
out of
Right.
use the most fuel. So they see that as the biggest impact. If you read a little more, NOx emissions, which, in California and all that are very regulated, is like 300 times the effect of CO2, but the mass volume isn't anywhere near what CO2 is. I mean,
Right.
because it's just not our industry and the heat treat industry, it's automotive and it's huge producers like cement and other contributors like that.
So how does the whole carbon neutrality thing work? Let's talk about it from 101 to 301.
Yeah.
I mean, walk us through all that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's trying to get to that neutral state where if you're emitting CO2 or carbon as and it's just not CO2, right? It can be leaking methane into the atmosphere.
Right. Any type of
contributes.
gas.
Yep, any type of gas. But at a macro level, I mean, it's a tall order for carbon neutrality, right? I mean, even for the most well-resourced companies, but like any massive problem, breaking those things into manageable parts is going to be the essential formula there, right? To
Right.
to eliminate emissions, cutting strategies, and inch towards that neutrality basis. Businesses and individuals, for that matter, are first going to have to pull out that measuring stick and determine, hey, how much actually do you emit, and what's the source of your emissions? And we'll talk about that. It's like if you have carbon neutral goals, aspirations, analyzing that your carbon footprint's probably going to be the first step, and it's not always the easiest thing to do, right? So
Right.
um
So let's talk a little bit about,
yep.
so somebody says, hey, I want to be carbon neutral, or they're looking saying, hey, we want to contribute to that. So this wasn't on my list of questions yet, but you just
Yep.
brought something up to me that, so burners and stuff that Honeywell's doing. I mean,
Yep.
how does product impact play a role in that? I mean, is products being developed that emit less in terms of usage?
Well, yes, and that gets back to, okay, if you're still looking that we'll mention hydrogen in a little bit here, but if you look at your processes now, your furnaces that you've got, your ovens, you're burning natural gas through it or propane or whatever, and it's generally natural gas here. It's actually relatively inexpensive, even with the spikes we've seen. There's ways to reduce those CO2 emissions, right? You got to use less fuel. So, and this is probably one of the questions one of the questions we get to later is what's the easiest thing to do? And I think I mentioned this in one of the sessions at F&A, is like tune your damn burner system. It's
Right.
like if you're belching out fuel, because I mean, hey, we all get it. Production is the name of the game. Hey, get the product out, get it done, get it shipped to the customer. But is there a way you can be more efficient in how you're burning that fuel? And that can be, hey, tune your system depending on what type of control system it is, or the different firing methods of a burner. But also there's products out there, and Honeywell isn't the only one that has them, but you look at a cold air burner that's putting the heat into your furnace, generally high velocity, things of that nature. You can get burners that can work with preheated combustion air. So you have a big recuperator or heat exchanger that takes your flue gases, exchanges that cold air, heats that cold air going to your burner system, and there's less delta T required. So you're not just taking cold air and heating it up to your 3000 plus degrees with natural gas and getting into the furnace. You're starting off at 800 degrees. So you've got less of a delta T, less energy to do that. And that can be through a central type system, or there's self-recuperative burners that little recuperator, that method to preheat the combustion air is actually in the burner itself. So that's a way you can be more efficient. If you're more efficient, you're burning less fuel being burned, less CO2, less carbon going out into the atmosphere.
So is there,
But yep, go ahead.
is there a way to because here's what I think when I think that through is you go through that process. You go, let's say you're burning 100 cubic tons of something of carbon or whatever you want to, however they rate it. And then you do the fix, and now you're only burning 65 to 70 cubic tons.
Yep.
So someone walks in and sees that. Do you think heat treaters should be documenting where they are today? So when they make any shifts, they see what they're doing, they can document that? Because someone may walk in and say, oh, you're at 65, you need to go lower. Well, you can't show them that you went from 100 to 65 until you document, correct?
Yeah, and that's the key. I mean, when you look at, if you take, so if you burn a million BTUs an hour of natural gas, there's 117 pounds of CO2 in that, if you totally combusted it. So if you actually measure your fuel, that's an excellent way to know where you're at. And I would challenge that. Obviously you're paying the bill, right? So you know how much natural gas you're using, but
Right.
on a total facility, that's good. But if you've got 20 different furnaces and 20 different processes, do you have the ability today to measure your gas usage in each of those furnaces? Because most heat treaters have different generational furnaces. We all know, I mean, being an equipment manufacturer, I wish our stuff only lasted 5 years, but there's furnaces out there with our equipment that started in 1960.
Oh, I've walked through those plants and they're workhorses, man. You're like, that was built in the 50s, wasn't it?
Absolutely. But I mean, when you consider that, hey, you may have 40-year-old furnaces, 50-year-old furnaces in your facility, but you might have just talked to your furnace vendor and delivered a furnace last year, and it's probably a little more efficient, I hope. But you may have more current technology on it. So it's a more efficient process, but all your furnaces are doing the work. Do you have a way to measure the gas going through the furnace? Because you can relate to fuel burned to CO2 produced. No doubt about it. That's pretty simple math, actually, in our world. But I mean, it goes back to that efficiency to start looking at, do you know where you're at now? Let's assess each furnace. I mean, do you see open holes with glowing refractory? There's a loss, there's something. And then you sit down and go, okay, assess the situation, and hey, who are our biggest, because we've been contacted, our biggest contributors to say CO2.
Right.
Because we've been contacted by people who said, hey, my customer just came to me and said, and this is a heat treater, saying, you will reduce your carbon emissions by 50%, or in X number of years, we will not do business with you. That scares me.
Yeah.
Because X furnace, Joe's furnace company or Joe's heat treating facility that has 20 furnaces. And he just doesn't care. He's just pouring
Yeah.
heat into something, burning fuel, but he's getting the product out. But then versus Joe, here's Bob's heat treating facility. And guess what? He's a stickler. He's got people that go out and tune his furnaces. He's always looking for the best and current technologies to be more efficient, helping his costs. But what happens when they both have they have a similar customer, the same customer that uses both of them, and they go reduce your emissions by 50%. Well, guess what? Joe over here can do that because he's already damn inefficient. What does Bob do? Because he's already very efficient.
Right.
So to have those talking points to be able to say, hey, here's what I do.
Right.
You challenge, it would be a challenge to go, you tell me how I can reduce 50% if I've got, yeah, there's always ways to do it. But it's a CO2 challenge then. And then you start talking, okay, what do you start talking alternate fuels? I mean, hydrogen's got a big hype, and we can talk about that a little bit as well.
So
that's the challenge I see, or one of the challenges among
well, and the whole climate change thing, I mean, you and I talked about it a little bit before we got online. Until you have everybody running the same direction, it's a huge challenge because it makes no difference if you got 10 manufacturing companies on a block and 4 of them are mean and lean, they're cutting their emissions, they're doing everything possible, and the other 6 are just, like you said, pushing out product, burning it through the pipeline. You're not making any, I mean, you probably are making some difference because you got 4 less companies doing it. But for me, to have significant movement on something, you got to really get everybody to a certain table where everybody's moving the same direction. Otherwise, you're working. I think that's one of the things we have challenged in this whole climate change thing with different countries, because the US is trying to be sustainable, going green, significant things. And then you got somebody, other countries who are just burning coal-fired plants and just pumping it in the air. And so
and
it's hard to work against one another.
Yeah, and it you certainly hear some talk about it, but I mean your big companies make those, hey, we will be carbon neutral by 2035, 2040, 2050. It's like sometimes that's with very little information on how are you going to actually get there, and what do you mean by neutral?
Right.
So that's going to be one of the challenges coming up. There's no way about it. I mean, I'm glad you put this event on because I mean, we are getting daily requests, hey, educate us about hydrogen. Now, being a company that burns mainly fossil fuels, right? We don't sell electricity. That's exciting to us. So we want to be prepared, and other people are starting to, and that's going to be the thing is, hey, what can I do to start learning? Where do I even start to look at, hey, what is my carbon footprint?
So if you just look at where we are, where we're chasing the electric car from gas powered cars, well, you got to believe that no matter you got to believe that the people in that power band pushing for that, well, they're going to look around manufacturing and see a lot of gas powered, natural gas powered companies that's pushing stuff out, and they're going to say they need to go electric or whatever can be less. I think that's something that the heat treaters, our members, need to really be thinking about. And that's why I really, when I started talking about this with you, I said, we got to get this out there so people can get it on the radar screen. Because I know Canada right now, I think they're a little bit ahead of us on it, because this is going to impact people's bottom lines. This is a money issue as well. So tell me if I'm wrong here. So I see there's 2 things that are going on. You can reduce emissions by just reducing them yourself. Then there's this thing called a carbon neutral offset, which gets into money, and it's not small money. Talking to some of our Canadian members, it is huge money. So talk to us about how the carbon neutrality offset kind of works. That's
a good question. I can't say I'm an expert in it, but it would be incentives, right? It would be something that, hey, I'm emitting, just like in the past there were NOx credits there out in California. They're eliminating those now. And really what I think the concept is that this offset is, okay, well, I can buy, or you're going to pay for this offset, so you'll be in compliance, and that money we get from you is going to go to hopefully I mean, we start talking governments and stuff like that, and I don't want to do that here, but
Hopefully,
hopefully what that's being, no, hopefully what that is okay, everybody's contributed to this carbon offset to offset the carbon. So it's going to eliminate deforestation. It's going to look at technologies for carbon capture. It's going to look at more renewable and sustainable type electrical production or energy
right,
production, like
right,
wind and solar and hydro and things of that nature. That is what I conceive as that type of offset, and that's not something I've gotten involved in. But we're starting to get some discussions with, at least educate ourselves with DOE and things of that nature to go, okay, where are you guys heading with this? So we can talk intelligently to our customers, like the heat treat community, to go, okay, here's what we know.
right,
And nothing's gospel yet, because you're not seeing any, you're not seeing those limits
right,
yet. We haven't seen them over here, but there are consequences. There is a carbon tax in Europe, and I don't know that much about it. I need to educate myself a little bit, but they, in the last couple of years, ratcheted up like 2 to 4 times in certain regions. So
right,
beyond the situation they're in right now with what's going on with Russia and all that, they're very energy conscious already. They always have been, because energy in most parts of the world, instead of the United States, is pretty expensive. Even natural gas
right,
is generally, and so the technologies we were talking about before, self-recuperation and more efficient type hiring technologies, those are the things that have been around for decades and decades. So that's nothing new. So that's something that we start talking reduction in carbon. It's a technology, it's investment, of course, but it can also say bottom line beyond this, the whole CO2 reduction, because you
right,
mentioned somebody say, hey, well, you want to get rid of your CO2, just go electric. Okay, that's easy. Well, I can tell you that, knowing some people in the utility markets, I'd said that there's 117 pounds of CO2 per million BTU natural gas. That equates to about 0.4 pounds of CO2 per kilowatt. So utilities in the last couple of years, at least some of the people I've talked to, are um, around the 1 to 1.2 pounds of CO2 per kilowatt. So that's 2-3 times the
right,
CO2 per kilowatt of natural gas. So when you start talking, and we can talk scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, and we can discuss that if you want to a little bit, but that's, if you're burning natural gas in your process in your furnace right now, that's considered scope 1, because that's going to produce your heated part.
right,
Electricity is considered scope 2, because you're getting that electricity from a utility.
right.
So it's kind of difficult. So there, I can imagine that there's some kind of scope 2 number on the gas side too, because you got to produce it and transmit it somehow, and there's going to get probably an additional carbon footprint to that as well.
Well, I think the thing that scares me about the whole offset, because the offset is a financial element, and I saw
Yeah.
the simplest, and I can explain it this way. I watched about 8 2 to 3 minute videos, and I'd encourage everybody listening to this, just go out to YouTube and type in what is carbon neutrality, and just watch every video you see pop up, so you get a great understanding of it. But the simplest video that kind of may help me understand it was Jack takes off in New York to Tokyo on a plane, and as he's buying his ticket or getting on, that he gets an opportunity to do a carbon neutral offset contribution, and he puts it on his credit card, whether it's $100 or whatever it is. And then he gets on, and he can rest assured, because he's now contributing to the climate change carbon neutral pathway, because he paid money into a system, and that money then is supposed to go to reducing emissions someplace else. But what the video went on to say, but the carbon emissions in the plane he got on and flew to Tokyo and back didn't come out of it's still emitted. So my fear for business owners is, if an offset type scenario is developed for companies, what is that going to mean to your bottom line? Because I mean, usually when the government comes to companies to get something like that, it's typically not cheap. So I mean, do you have anything you can talk about in terms of the calculation of the carbon footprint a company's going to have?
I can talk about it from a fossil fuel standpoint,
Right,
and per kilowatt, you can go to most of your, if not all, electric utilities will know what their carbon footprint is per kilowatt. So if you've got a carbon electric bill, and you got your total kilowatt hour rate. You can
Right.
calculate that. If you've got your fuel usage and it can be via the plant, you can do a pretty simple calculation on what your CO2 production there. Then there's going to be what I'd mentioned, and I'll just kind of mention it real quick. What the discussion is, if you and this is, you can break down emission scopes into scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, and go Google it. You will get all kinds of articles on what scope 1, 2, and 3 are, but really EPA scope 1 emissions is direct emissions. So it's direct greenhouse gas emissions from company owned and controlled resources of the organization. So that falls under your stationary, like stationary combustion, gas fired equipment, things of that nature. Mobile combustion, so that's fuel on vehicles that are moving around that are company owned.
Right.
Fugitive emissions, hey, that's leakage from air conditioning units, your piping, and then any process emissions. So think of big cement plants, things of that nature. Your scope 2 are scope 3 and scope 2 and scope 3 are your indirect emissions, but your scope 2 are indirect emissions from owned equipment. So it's owned by you. So indirect greenhouse emissions are associated with the purchase of, say, electric, steam, heat, any cooling by an organization. So although those emissions don't physically occur at the facility where they're generated, but they're accounted for in an organization's greenhouse gas inventory because they're a result of the company's energy use.
Right.
And then your scope 3 are indirect, not owned emissions. And this can be their result of activities from assets not owned or controlled by that organization. But that organization indirectly impacts its value, its value chain, right? So it's referred to the value chain emissions. So
Right.
at times it can represent, depending on what your organization does. Heat Treat does a lot of, obviously, heating for their business, but it can sometimes represent a majority of the organization's greenhouse gas emissions. So
And everything that you're listening into, that you're in the forefront of some of this stuff with what you do, what kind, any timelines that have been discussed on, you know, deadlines that members would have to think through to start preparing? Because you don't want to wait on the last minute of something like this,
right,
for sure.
right, and that's where, I mean, you see it all over the news. That's a very fluid situation. So some of the very large corporations have that carbon neutrality moniker by 2035. Honeywell does 2035, but 2040, 2050, et cetera. Those timelines could come from your customers, right? In the case where, hey, you need to reduce, we've pledged this, so you need to reduce your carbon footprint because it's in our scope 2 or 3 emissions by X percentage by X date. So that's the type of timelines. I don't see any overall global country related type timelines. But certainly the big corporations, your PepsiCos, your Honeywells, your Nucor Steels, your automakers are all making those type of pledges to be neutral. And that's going to be their type of formulas because they're going to be doing all types of activities. So that's a big thing that I'm not smart enough to get my hands around yet. But in terms of how it would impact MTI's membership, what I would pledge is just start getting ready, start educating yourself on what do they really mean by carbon neutral, or what can I do to start looking at what's my carbon footprint? How is this today? Where do I sit?
So what I'm hearing you say also, though, is that you could just like, I mean, you could turn this into a business opportunity on your checklist when you're talking. I say, if you're talking to an OEM or a prime, like a Boeing, and you say, hey, we're carbon neutral, and here's how we show that. Would you say that's a good thing to be checking off when you're talking to your customers, with some of them now starting to look at that and require it?
Some customers, yes. I know that I can't remember where it's at. It's over in Europe somewhere. I don't know if it was France. They installed the first net carbon free, well, they're burning hydrogen, and that's a whole different case of where you're getting the hydrogen and all that good stuff. But when we start talking that, it can certainly be a selling point to say, hey, I'm carbon neutral, or I'm looking to be that green moniker that a lot of people are looking to do. And I mean, is it going to cost more to do business? Probably, but I mean, that's the $1 million question is like, okay, well, what do I start looking at to reduce those costs? Are there going to be those carbon offsets that become involved, or it's some type of thing? I don't know. Those are questions that I haven't seen answered yet.
So one of our members asked,
Yep.
in the Midwest, is neutrality measured from cradle to grave on product output? And what I think through is it on a product from cradle to grave, or is it, 5 years ago we were burning this much fuel in our operation and production's gone up. We're now burning less fuel because we're more efficient. We're cutting emissions. I mean, how do you measure that?
Well, it was, yeah, that's a good question. Is you should tie those figures. If you're more efficient today than you were 5 years ago, and you've increased production, that's something that you should document, right? And I'm just saying, I always say documentation everything. I'm a guy that comes into, so it's always the burner's fault, right? No matter what's going on, the burner's always the problem. But what first thing I'm going to say is, where's your data? What are the burners set at? I don't know. I'm like, well, okay, then you're speaking Greek to me, because I can't help you if you don't know where you're at.
Right.
To know where you're at, that's the best position to be in, because you could actually see your natural gas. Obviously, costs go up when prices of natural gas go up, but if you know quantity being used, and it might go up because you're doing more production, but it's knowing it's having that data available to be able to do that analysis.
Yeah, I know a lot of members, they can spit off. I mean, I know because we've asked before in studies, but they can spit off how much in dollars that they spend on energy. But I wonder how many of them actually, I think that's a great thing to encourage, is that, know the amounts, the usage by the usage numbers, because that's what your emissions, because, you don't want to be inflatable, and you don't want your numbers to be inflated because it's the cost of the gas going up, but not the usage.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right, Tom, because that's really, it's pounds in, pounds out, right? Pounds of fuel in, pounds of CO2 out. That's what it comes down to. At least when you're looking at a fossil fuel based, and you can look at the same thing in your electric usage. And that's going to keep coming down too. I mean, utilities are looking at this. They're not the only one. They're going to look at this, the sustainability or the carbon neutral type thing is, hey, guess what? A lot of these power plants are still burning natural gas and coal. Coal's dramatically come down from 40 to 20% in the last 20 years, and natural gas is going up. And I never thought in my lifetime that natural gas would be considered the dirty fuel, but that's kind of the moniker some people will give it. Obviously, it's much better than burning oil or coal or things of that nature. So it's just looking at the situation and how's it going to affect your business in the future. And I can't imagine that by 2030 people are going to have, some people have targets for that, but it may be a 20% CO2 reduction by 2030, something that makes sense. Because I can tell you, in my 27 plus years in the combustion industry, there's been all types of things. Methanol was the rage, and there's more corn being produced for that. And it's on the alternate fuel list now to be able to be more sustainable, have a more sustainable planet, because it still makes CO2, but not as much, or it's sustainable because it's a product that we grow, things of that nature.
But I mean, you think about the unintended consequences of things like methanol made of corn, because I can remember when that was becoming a big deal, and we saw the price of tortillas and tacos going up literally because that's the big proponent in that mix. And that's a big component of, obviously, I mean, so it impacted food supply in certain elements because the corn, there was a huge demand on corn coming through. So you just don't know the unintended. So one of our members asked, can you repeat the pounds of CO2 per BTU number that you were talking about?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is purely science, right? Per million BTU used of natural gas, it's 117 pounds of CO2 when it's all combusted.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about, carbon neutral offsets, how it works, the climate change stuff. So I'm a heat treater, and I'm gonna go walk in my plant when I come in tomorrow and say, okay, I'm going to start making a checklist of things I need to start looking at and what we need to look to the future to do. So what should the heat treaters listening in be looking to do tomorrow morning when they wake up to start looking that obviously get well informed. I can tell you, we're going to refer this to our safety committee right after we get off this call and start getting it on their docket to start looking through and saying, what kind of resources can we provide? Because MTI likes to get their members out in front of stuff like this so you can be prepared for it. We do that with NADCAP and NAMEC and a whole other a whole lot of stuff, and we want to get in front of this. So what should heat treaters be looking to do when they're walking through their plant to make notes of as they walk through?
Well, and each plant's different, right? And it's really to assess what are the assets that you have that are going to have the biggest impact on carbon reduction. I mean, really, it's assessing. I've got X number of furnaces. Which furnaces are burning natural gas? Which furnaces are electric? Because there are avenues in the future that as electricity gets cheaper, because right now natural gas is cheaper than electric in certain areas of the country. I mean, I've talked to furnace manufacturers that said, hey, if I went into West Virginia, it was one or the other. It's like, there's no way I'd even bring up gas versus electric or vice versa, right? Because one just doesn't make sense to the other. So that's going to be part of it. But really to have that assessment of your operations, right? It's like, okay, what are my assets? What are burning gas? What are electric? Do I have the ability to nail down the efficiency, or I would say, what am I burning? What kind of gas or what kind of electric am I using in each one of these furnaces or ovens, just to have that baseline, and then start working with your vendors. I mean, a lot of these furnace companies are very, very interested. I mean, I talked to BJ Bernard at Surface, and he's like, hey, we need to figure out if I need to go sell a furnace to somebody, I can give them a what's my carbon footprint of X furnace if I fire it with cold air, natural gas fired burners, recuperated burners, pure hydrogen, have zero emissions, electric. So it's that type of mindset in some of the industry that we're working with, in that, hey, they want to be able to put a carbon footprint and really just to get ready. And like, this isn't going to happen tomorrow, but again, we've already been involved on sites that they're being asked to reduce it in a time frame, and it's not hitting everybody right away. But really just that would be the first step, in my opinion, is really to have a really good assessment of kind of what that carbon footprint is of each of your firing assets, or I should say your heating assets within your operation. Because being a burner guy, I mean, we're talking gas versus electric and all that. There's going to be different. I mean, this gets down to, hey, how are you? Do you have boilers on site? That's another contributor. Anything that's got some type of thermal input and using energy, that's going to be under the scope. So it's really to try to evaluate, hey, what are my biggest carbon producers to start? Because if you get asked the question on how are you going to reduce carbon, it's like, oh, okay, well, 4 of these 20 furnaces, these are my targets because these produce the much. And here's what that planning goes to, then contacting your vendors, whether it's a furnace company or a combustion company or somebody else. I mean, it can be consultants and all that. Is, hey, here's what I've identified. What should we be looking at to have the biggest impact? Because when you go down the road of, okay, what's technology to be more efficient? And today it might be natural gas, because there's a lot of talk about hydrogen, right? But availability and all that. And as that becomes more mature, you'll have it more available. It'll be cheaper, all that good stuff. But in certain situations, you may have that ability, you may not. It's like, okay, well, if I look at a technology today that's running on fossil fuels, in the future, can I run on a biogas? Can I run on a hydrogen? Can I run something that run on a fuel that is going to produce less CO2?
Well, when you look at the whole electricity thing, it kind of blows my mind, though, because there's this massive push by 2030. They're trying to predict that we'll have at least 25% of the cars will be electric on the road. Well, we already got blackouts going on. The power grid is already not well enough to sufficiently. And think about one of our demographers that many of our members have heard, Kenneth Grombach, is sharing that a few years ago, he shared that we're 20 to 25 million homes short of meeting the demands, because the largest generation history, the millennials, are between 17 and 36. And so that group is coming. There's 80 million of them. They're coming. The first time home buyer in America is 32 to 33 years old. Well, we're only like year 3 in those 80 million people becoming first time home buyers. So there, he's predicting that we have about a 20 to 25 million home shortage, which guess what homes are driven by? Electricity. So you got you got 20 million new homes. You got who knows how many cars going to have to need electricity. And now we're going to take every major industry out there that burns natural gas and fossil fuels and say, hey, you got to be electric. I mean,
we're going to electrify you. Yeah.
That's kind of the unintended consequence. I think that whoever's in charge of this isn't really thinking through. All they're worried about is we're going to get there by 2035. We don't know how, we don't have a plan, but 2035 is the deal. And by the way, if you can't do it, just pay some money to an offset and we'll figure it out later. It doesn't, you know, and my things are, where's the money going? Who's in charge of it? How it's being spent? What is it being spent on? And if government's in the middle of it, I just don't know.
Yeah, it's a little, I mean, it's a little scary. I mean, it's nothing that, again, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's just trying to be prepared because this thing is going to keep evolving, as at least in my viewpoint, on what makes the most sense. Because we've had carbon. We just did I was on my first, at least we did a carbon audit of a company. Just to evaluate their assets. And there was electrically heated stuff, a lot of gas fired stuff. And the discussion was, hey, what can we electrify? It's like, well, how do we reduce our carbon in these fuel fired situations? Burn hydrogen. How am I going to get that? I don't know. But that technology, I mean, most of your hydrogen today comes from the refinery end of it, which is steam methane reforming.
Right.
That actually is carbon positive, right? I mean, you would make less CO2 if you just burn the natural gas, but that's a byproduct of most refinery situations.
Sure.
That hydrogen's a bonus. So I know because my twin brother, there's a twin, he works for ExxonMobil his whole career. There he is. He's much better looking now. He's full-time on hydrogen now. And I mean, how they may look to commercialize it and things of that nature. So it's something that most of them, even the refineries and even the oil and gas, is looking at the future of what might happen with this. But I mean, that's your gray hydrogen, and we could tell you all the different scopes of hydrogen too. But that's where they're looking at, and Honeywell's done the same thing, and other corporations like, hey, what are the technologies out there that you can capture that carbon and sequester it and make it neutral? Where are we going to take it to?
Right.
But then, okay, well, if you really want to get, that's then blue hydrogen, but your green hydrogen is made by electrolyzation, which is just electricity separating the water and the oxygen, or the hydrogen and the oxygen from water, H2O, right?
Right.
And that's where the electricity used that is from a renewable source. So it's green electricity. Okay, that infrastructure's got to grow. Just like we were talking about electric cars, it's like you can't possibly. Some people are smoking dope, right? I mean, we're going to do all the California. We're going to be X% by 2030, and then the next day they said, "Don't plug in your electric car because the grid's going to go down." Holy crap, right? It's just common sense sometimes. But I mean, I've been researching this, and I've been to electrification conferences, but that had something to talk about hydrogen. It's like, hey, these electrolyzers are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's going to take a couple really big corporations to go, I don't care what the cost is. I'm putting that electrolyzer on site, and I'm going to make X cubic feet of hydrogen per day. And I'm going to be totally green hydrogen. There's a cost to that. And okay, where are you getting? And one of the sites, it was near a river that, guess what? They're going to do it. And they have green electricity because they're right next to a river with hydropower. That's situational. So commercially, hydrogen's expensive right now. I mean, 3 to 4 to 5 times the cost of natural gas per million BTU an hour, because hydrogen's a third of the heating value of natural gas. And we won't get into the physics there, but all that with things that are going on, it's economics. Hey, when does it make financial sense for it to happen? Because right now it wouldn't. But then you get into offsets, and you get into a lot of different programs that might happen to try to reduce the greenhouse gases. But as you had said, if we're doing everything we can to get carbon neutral, and other countries don't do anything, and most of them are doing something, or at least that's their moniker, saying, hey, by 2050 we're going to we'll be carbon neutral, all that. Because I mean, CO2 not like we can have a bubble, right? We don't
Right.
we produce in 25 years, the US produces 50% less CO2 than we used to. Well, that still goes, and it's global, right? CO2 doesn't, it's not in a bubble in the US, right? It
Right. The
goes
wind blows,
everywhere. So,
right?
well, the wind blows, and at least in my viewpoint, is like, yeah. So looking at deforestation and looking at other stuff like that, that's going to be part. That's got to be part of the equation. It's just
Right.
having that. How do you make a global sustain it? And I don't even want to say sustainability, because this is about reducing carbon into the atmosphere. But I mean, you got to look at other emissions as well. But how do you get that? That's the as we were talking, that's the key. Is okay, where's that master plan? And it's going to be difficult. Like,
So what type of, so heat treaters go out tomorrow and they start assessing their assets, like you said, their furnaces,
yep.
their energy bills. Who's the number one group or people that they should be connecting with to help them understand what their carbon footprint is? Is it their energy company? Is it their furnace manufacturer? Is it the burner company? Who can help guide them down this
You know what?
process?
I wish I had an answer for you. You stumped me on that one, because I mean, um, there are, from some of the research I did just to make sure I didn't sound like an idiot doing this. I mean, you can go on the internet right now. I've got one. It says, well, hear this, and companies, and contact us at register now for free with Climate Partner Academy to learn a bit more about your carbon neutrality. I'd say start looking for people that maybe have a track record of being able to assess this, because I can tell you that I know Department of Energy is working on some of this. I mean, they've made fantastic tools in the past for fuel fired furnaces and even electricity. So let's put it this way: as I learn more, and maybe we get together in a year from now and go, hey, here's what I've learned about, hey, if you need somebody to partner with, certainly some of your furnace companies are going to be able to at least assess their equipment. But when you start talking all the different assets that you may look at, and this gets in all your different scope emissions and stuff, that's still all evolving. So I wish I had an answer for the audience.
Well, here's what we've really learned today, and I've noticed this through the web, looking on the web about this stuff, is one, as we talked about, there is no real timeline yet. We've got 2035 and 2050 out there, but there's no direct timeline today to get stuff down. But what we do know is it's a real issue, and heat treaters, as well as every manufacturing plant, is going to have to think this through, of how they can fix their plant and operations to be climate friendly over time in some fashion, whether they're doing it within usage, or they're paying an offset in some capacity that funds and fuels the opportunity to lower emissions but here's what I'll assure members listening in, is MTI Safety Committee is going to dig into this really big, and we're going to hopefully put together some of those checklists and bring, because right now there's so many unanswered questions because there's no real rules to it yet. So we're hoping to, along the way, bring you some answers and checklists so that you can stay in front of this thing, not behind it. Because the last thing you want on your business is to have the EPA or whoever's going to be in charge of it knocking at your door going, hey, you got to have this and you don't have it. So we're going to be doing that. So Brian, any of the last moment thoughts that you think that we may not have shared that you're thinking you want to communicate to members on this issue?
Yeah. Don't be scared. Because I mean, nothing turns on a dime in our industry, right? Like I mentioned, it's like we just unfortunately discontinued a Hawk burner a couple years ago that was premiered in 1929. So revolutionary oil burner, and we were the oil burner company. So I mean, we're a pretty mature industry, but I can tell you from a vendor of this that there may be opportunities for you out there as a result of what's going on. It may be painful, and it's going to be a rocky road, because we're moving pretty quick on the rhetoric and the talk. It's just, I would reinforce, educate yourself on it, and use your vendors, use us as a vendor to say, hey, here's what so far we've experienced. Because I mean, from our end, it's been, because we're gas burners, it's hydrogen. But I'm not stupid or naive to say, hey, there are processes in the future, depending on location and costs and all that does it make sense to, the utilities will love this, to electrify the process, right? I mean, I was talking to, in the spring meeting, somebody was asking about furnaces, and they're like, we don't have one gas-fired furnace in our facility. It was all electric. And it was like, wow, no kidding. And it's an education, and
Right.
really just start educating yourself a little by little on this. And this goes down to, hey, what does carbon neutral mean? And all the other buzzwords out there, sustainability and net neutral and planet and carbon, climate positive and all that. Sometimes they mean the same things, but start getting a little educated on your different scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, just to understand it, because someday somebody's going to probably ask you a question about it.
Right.
That's all.
Right. Well, and you're going to have vendors, like you said, you're going to have customers say you got to
Yeah.
be carbon neutral for us to do business with you. Well, you got to be able to prove that and show it. So it's getting educated now and becoming somewhat, not an expert, but knowing it enough to how it's going to impact your business.
Yeah.
Because it's going to have it's not, because to me, the danger is not having an impact of you being forced to use less energy, but the bigger impact is a forced cost on you for having to pay an offset because you don't meet a
Yep.
certain number for the government. So,
Yep.
well, Brian, thank you so much for Honeywell and all your support of MTI, F&A, and what we do. And thank you for being with us today and sharing that time.
Oh, my pleasure. I appreciate being here.
Members, we appreciate every single one of you every single day. We're here to help you out. Remember not to miss the November 8th Technical Standards Committee and the November 10th sales forecasting. You can go to our website at heattreat.net, go down a little bit on the page, and you'll see the scheduled calendar of events, and you can click on either one of those, and the RSVP links are there for you to take and the information. So you remember always, you're not just strong, you're MTI strong, and we're here for you every day. Have a great day.